Grady Chambers, this is the first time I'm meeting him, first time a lot of you are meeting him. I'm not going to go into a much of a biography of Grady because I feel like Great Disasters, the novel that we read for tonight, um, gives you more insight into Grady's life than I could read off of a scripted page that he wrote in the third person, right?
Well, maybe we'll talk about that part of the book later.
And Grady, he's a lot younger than me. I don't exactly know how old Grady is. I know exactly how old I am. I'm 60. Um, yeah, but we both went to Syracuse University. I want to talk to him a little bit about that because I see some of the influence of the Syracuse School of Writing in this novel. But Grady was a poet when he was at Syracuse, which is one of the better creative writing programs in the country. And then he got a Stegner Fellowship to Stanford University, which is arguably the best of the creative writing programs in the country. Was working on poetry and published a book, North American Stadiums, right?
Indeed, yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, yeah.
North American Stadiums in 2018, and then followed up with this novel. From Chicago, lives in Philadelphia now. He's going to fill in some of the blanks as we go. But Grady, thanks for coming, and looking forward to getting into your book.
Thank you. It's so good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
When did you get to Chicago?
Just last night. Flew out of Philly and minor delays and was back at my dad's house by about 9 p.m. last night.
And your dad's here?
My dad is right here, and my girlfriend Emily.
Welcome. Now you had said that you thought that maybe one of your old high school friends who was a model for one of the characters might be here, but didn't make it, huh?
Indeed, I have two good friends who I grew up with who, in reading this book, saw parts of themselves, and some of the characters are currently living in Chicago. I did let them know about the event, but they have gone to pretty much every other event within 3 hours of Chicago that I've been a part of. So they sat this one out.
Yeah, I feel a little slighted.
I'll let them know.
Well, you don't have to admit it. I think everybody here has read the novel at this point. I wanted to start with something that I noticed, and it comes from there's an excerpt in your book. It was a comfort to look away from those scenes and get lost in the world of whatever book I brought from our school's required summer reading list. The Catcher in the Rye, The Great Gatsby, or The Bluest Eye. I didn't think that was a coincidence. I saw some connections in your narrator, Graham Katz, and all three of those, but in particular, The Gatsby's Nick Carraway, the first person voice, the narrator trying to reassemble a past, but also in that Nick Carraway and Graham Katz are both, without starting out to do so, they've become commentators on a generation, which can only be looked at in retrospect. Your book is it spans a lot of different themes and ideas, but that seemed to be a part of it for me. What are your thoughts on the connection? Did you think about that, or did you admire the Gatsby?
I think of the three books that you mentioned,
and you mentioned first.
That I mentioned first in Great Disasters. The one that I see most directly influencing Great Disasters is Catcher in the Rye, and particularly like the voice of Holden Caulfield. The Great Gatsby, I thematically and in terms of kind of narrative perspective and approach, I very much see a likeness between that and Great Disasters, but honestly have not read The Great Gatsby since it was assigned to me in like 8th grade English, but I aim to return to it. But The Catcher in the Rye is a book that I loved immediately the first time that I read it, and it's a book that I've returned to with some regularity over the years. And I thought a lot about it as I was working on this novel, because I wanted in the voice of my narrator, Graham Katz, some aspect of Holden Caulfield's voice, a kind of like definitely a youthfulness, particularly in the first half of this book, but also kind of a little bit of irreverence. And one aspect to The Catcher in the Rye that I really love is that I feel like the reader knows more about Holden Caulfield than he knows about himself. And for me, that was an element that I hoped would come into Great Disasters, and that readers of the book would feel that they might know a little bit more about the narrator than he's able to see about himself.
Do you know Adam Levin's? Adam Levin also was a Syracuse University graduate, who I think was probably he's probably older than you.
He is, yeah, he's probably 10 years older than me, and also went through the Syracuse MFA program probably 7 or 8 years before I did. But he returned a couple times while I was there to do a reading once and for an additional event. So yeah, I got to meet him a couple times.
So for those of you that don't know, he wrote this epic novel, and by epic I mean in part very long novel called Mount Chicago, but it's also epic in its ambition. But the reason why I bring him up is because his Adam uses a sort of a metafictional kind of construction for Mount Levin or Mount Chicago, in which he uses the character, the protagonist, the narrator of Mount Chicago is Adam Levin, not to be confused with the author, Adam Levin. And of course, he studied with George Saunders, and George Saunders is also, really challenges, typical construction and so forth. But in any event, what happens with the metafiction in Adam Levin's story, some of George Saunders, and then here in Great Disasters is that there's a deliberate blurring, or the lines between fiction and memoir are deliberately blurred. And it's hard to tell the distinction between one and the other. So why did you make the choice to do it that way? And how do you think it impacts the way we read the story?
Yeah, well, so for, the narrator's name in the book is Graham Katz. And some people in this room will know this, some people probably won't, but my mother's maiden name is Katz. And so I think a couple of things. One thing is that because of the sort of the overlap in some of the pillars of the book and the story between the biography of Graham and my own biography, I sort of knew that readers of the book who I grew up with or who knew me would see that biographical overlap between the two characters. And so it kind of in choosing to give the narrator my mom's last name, that was it kind of amused me to do so, because it was sort of like a little wink at people who would inevitably read the book and not be able to help be thinking what exactly is true to life and what is fictional invention. But in a more earnest sense, my mom passed away in 2023. And it felt like kind of a sweet way to keep her alive in the book. And because I talk about, or the narrator in talking about his own mother's life, I give the narrator's mother like a lot of overlap with my mother's life. It kind of felt like a way of like honoring some of her experiences. But I don't, the thing is that I'm maybe more excited about readers who will come to this book who will have no idea of my own biography. And so for them, when they see the name Graham Katz, they will not see that kind of biographical overlap, and that none of those questions will will be in their minds. And that's kind of my preference, because it gives the book becomes not kind of shadowed by this question of what is true to life and what is fictional invention.
The George Saunders, I know you were studying poetry at Syracuse. Did you study with George at all?
I did. I took two classes with George. One was just a class on his favorite short stories by Russian authors, and another class that I think was the title was something like George's favorite short stories of all time. So I got to learn from him more in a capital L literature class capacity than in a creative writing workshop capacity.
Yeah, there aren't that many literary stars, but he's one of the few people that you see on late night talk shows and stuff. So when you get to be George Saunders, you can do whatever the fuck you want. You can have that kind of class. You can live in the Catskills, come to Syracuse occasionally.
Absolutely.
Which, by the way, is what he does, right?
Right, exactly. And 10th of December came out, I think, while I was at Syracuse. And so suddenly, he's on the cover of the New York Times Sunday magazine. It was incredible.
Yeah.
But I think, he really shaped my reading life more than my approach to writing, in that some of the stories that I read in his classes, particularly I love Anton Chekhov, and some of stories of Chekhov's that have gone on to become my favorites, I first read in George's class. But he did say one thing that I think about as I write and as I edit all the time that has been enormously influential to me. And it came from his own writing practice, in which he said that when he writes and when he edits, he's always thinking about the reader next to him, and wondering, is the reader enjoying themselves as they read these pages? Do they want to know what happens next? Are they bored by the prose? So when I was working on this book, and my inclination was to write 7-page sequences about the wind and the light coming off of Lake Michigan, I thought about George's advice and decided the reader's probably not going to be having a lot of fun with that.
I detect.
Very well. Thank you, George.
I detect a lot of your poetic sensibilities throughout the novel. Your attention to the naturalistic elements, your careful imagery creation, but also how you take these very small moments and explode them, like a lot of great poetry does, seemingly trivial or insignificant moments that become much larger. Your poetry background, does it give you any advantages in writing a novel? And were there any challenges because of coming at it as a poet?
I think the biggest challenge, which I sort of just alluded to, was needing to put the brakes on my sort of more lyrical inclinations, because I truly, as I was working on what ended up becoming sort of the first section of this novel, before I even knew that what I was working on was going to be something that was novel length. I was writing these lengthy descriptions of the Midwest landscape and memories of driving through them on the way to soccer games or hockey games. And at some point I sort of read it back and I was like, why does this suck? Why doesn't this have any energy? And it was because nothing was happening. There was no conflict. There was no plot movement. So that was sort of a helpful, honest conversation to have with myself. I think there are two ways that so many years spent focusing solely on writing poetry really aided me in writing the novel. The first way is that the compression of poetry, poems generally tend to be pretty small, and my inclination in a poem tends to be to try and tell a story. So to try and tell a story in the course of, oftentimes like something that's less than a page in length forces you to communicate stakes to a reader really quickly, and also get a reader's try and get them interested in the story that you're telling, and also to create some kind of emotional effect in a reader in a very short amount of space. And oftentimes I fail at doing that, but that is what I'm often trying to do in a poem. And so I think that helped me a lot in working on this novel, which is kind of, it's 8 sections, and each section kind of tells a story of its own. The second thing is that, as I was working on poems for so many years, I spent a lot of time laboring to bring like sound into the language and rhythm through sentences. And so when I turned to writing prose, that sort of attunement to sound and rhythm, I think, kind of made its way a little bit more naturally into the prose without me thinking about it, because of all those years thinking about those things, writing poetry. Whereas I think with some other writers, they have to think a little bit more consciously about how to bring those elements into their prose.
The private school at the center of this novel, I think it's unnamed in here, but it's you.
So I didn't get sued,
But you went to Francis Parker. There's this long tradition of Chicago writers that I think a lot of us feel like we got to live up to. And you've got the gritty realism, social justice, the underbelly of Chicago. It's not unprecedented, of course, for writers to Chicago writers to write about tonier neighborhoods or subjects, but that's a bit of a challenge, though. It's something you've got to. Is it something that you thought about as you were writing?
It definitely is. I'm trying to think about the question of how much I was consciously thinking about it or not. I think at some point I realized that any story that I might tell that had autobiographical roots and drew from my own life, and that could speak in ways that hopefully to a reader felt honest and true about both in the life of the narrator and the life that he's writing about, and the broader sort of socio-political context that the book is thinking about in terms of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and protests. I think I came to feel that the story was going to be much better if I admitted readily the sort of privilege of the person telling you the story. And by doing so, that became like a theme and a subject of the story. And I think probably, and I think that like the privilege of the characters that the narrator is a part of and is talking about, I think this is a much better book for the narrator talking about that privilege and telling about the happinesses and pains and tragedies of this group of characters than if I had sort of been like, trying to write like a down and out kid from Ohio who enlisted in the military and tried to imagine what his life was like in Kandahar or whatever. Yeah.
You have a passage about privilege you were going to
Oh,
read?
I do. Yeah.
We wanted to kind of work in a few short readings to hear Grady's voice.
Totally. So I don't even know what section this is from. This is from the Remember Sam section. It's page 128 at the bottom. From this distance, I'm able to see what a mark that was of privilege. I had the sense of how much people were suffering, but there in Prague, drinking in the cave bar nearly every night, smoking with classmates, ordering yet another tall, dark pint, I was removed from it. I observed it from a distance. Like the events of September 11th, the events I was reading about hadn't touched me, not really anyway, not in any serious way.
But of course, all the characters are not equally privileged. Some of them come from pretty rough circumstances and households. And I'm thinking of Sam,
Mhm.
also Ryan. Ryan gravitates toward a sort of conservatism that is relatively unheard amongst his classmates. And then he also eventually goes into the military. The September 11th attacks and then the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, they're more than just backdrop to this story. I think that societal upheaval and the context that gives to Graham's life and his struggles. Also, coming back to that idea of giving definition to this generation or their times is a big part of who they were, even though it was seemingly remote. So maybe you can read a little bit about the Iraq War and the protest movements that they participated in.
Surely. So I think I'll read two small passages on pages 64 and 65, which I think both speak to the sort of combination of these characters coming of age and trying to figure out just who they are as people and just trying to survive high school and make friends, while also you know, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have begun, and because of their family circumstances, you know, they have, you know, the parents of Graham are, you know, people who have sort of devoted their lives to social activism and anti-war activism in one way or another. So there's this, you know, pressure to kind of take a stance and stand for something on these complex global issues. But you know, they're like 14 years old. So that tension kind of interests me. So this is when they're in high school. The wars were everywhere then, first Afghanistan and then that March Iraq, but they were everywhere abstractly. Civics class, Model UN, the basket of peace pins by my parents' front door. Our junior year history teacher would show us the fog of war, but gave us little context, expecting us to make the connections, but something was lost along the way. I would come away from it thinking McNamara was somehow good. I thought our teacher meant for us to sympathize with him. The wars were quote unquote bad, our parents said. That was the simplicity of the language they used. The election had been quote stolen. Our troops abroad were quote an occupying force. 9/11 or not, they said, Bush would have gone to war with Iraq. Standing at their kitchen counters, talking on their phones or chatting with a friend, our parents made 1,000 variations of those same points. In the middle of their conversations, they'd look over at us as we tried to slip into the kitchen unnoticed for a snack or a glass of milk, expecting our assent. And the other passage is, in those years, and the speaker or the narrator with his civics class goes to the protests against the war in Iraq. 2000, March 2003, if I have that right. It could be 2002. So they're just arriving at the heart of the protest. We walked east on Adams, chants from the protesters ricocheting off the glass and steel of the towering buildings. Trudging down the plowed streets, squinting into the biting wind, hunched against it, it felt as if the tall towers surrounding us hemmed us in, their dark mass crowding out the light. And then the buildings above us suddenly stopped, and the street opened to the gray width of Federal Plaza, the center of the protest, total madness, the courtyard crammed like a train after a baseball game. People screamed through megaphones. Others tried to climb the sculpture at the plaza's center. Children swayed on their father's shoulders. The gray sky was suddenly visible and low, a square of it cut out from the crowd of surrounding buildings, like a mere reflection of the plaza beneath it. We had arrived.
Did anybody notice how I was lecturing Grady here about the privilege in his novel while Gabby was refilling my commitment.
So one day you'll write a funny scene in a book about that.
Your dad, Scott Chambers, your mom, Marilyn Katz, they've dedicated a lot of their lives to anti-racism, anti-war protests. Graham Katz's parents likewise are very, leaders in movement to stop the war. It's such a huge subject, such an enormous theme. How did you manage to sort of put that big subject matter inside the context of a story that really is not seemingly about war at all, or about that?
I think by gravitating towards writing about places or events that came from my life, where my life did intersect in some kind of way with emblems of that broader context that of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, of the protests against them that come into the book. So I think so for example, like over the course of the book, the ways that the things that precipitate the narrator's like meditations on that sort of broader umbrella, those are precipitated by, the narrator attending a protest with his friends, the narrator passing by the Flight 93 memorial in Ohio, just on the side of the road, and deciding to pull off the road. It comes into the book most directly when the narrator is remembering playing hockey games in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, and the announcer before the game asking the players to stand in a circle and remember the lives that were lost. And it comes into the book when the narrator's much older and he's reading the transcripts from phone calls on September 11th, either from people on the hijacked planes to loved ones or people in the World Trade Center back home. So each of those things, like the events that precipitated those meditations, are things that happened in my own life. Like I went to the Flight 93 memorial, and I think there's something about gravitating to true events from my life that helped the wars and the meditations on them come into the book in a more natural way, and maybe in a way that reads truer to the readers, because as the narrator talks about, when he's in 8th grade or 9th grade and in the immediate aftermath of September 11th, he doesn't think about like what a tragedy that was. He thinks like, oh shit, this is kind of exciting. Like something happened. We're now at war, which is obviously like that is a mark of privilege, but it's also, a very human kind of understandable thought for an 8th grader. Mm-hmm. And then to have that narrator talk about encountering the 9/11 phone call transcripts like many years later, I think that gave me space as the sort of the writer behind this all to spend a few pages in the course of the book thinking directly about those events and kind of meditating on them. And I think so, interestingly to me, when I think about how much 9/11 and the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan shadow the book, it's interesting to me how actually over the course of the book, how little page space is devoted to thinking about those things, mm-hmm. which kind of tells me that it's better not to like go at it super directly over the course of a whole book, but you can trust, if you pay attention to those things sort of sporadically over the course of a book, that might cast a bigger shadow than
The movie references, I'm sure everybody noticed, there's a high velocity of movie references throughout the novel. In fact, there's a glossary of films referenced in the back of the book, which tells me that at some point you realized that whether it was deliberate to start or not, that this was a thing, right? I actually, as I was going back through the book a second time, I was like transcribing a lot of the references, and I'm not gonna, we're gonna take a break in a little bit here, but so I'm not gonna go into them. But these plot and scene summaries, first of all, they're tremendous. Like they're not, the movies aren't always named. Sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. But Graham is making a real connection, and in some ways using the cinematic world as a portal into this life he wants to lead, or this idealized version of a life he wants to lead. So my first question is, how many movies did you go back and watch in order to draft the novel?
The honest answer is none. I have watched so many movies of it's one of my greatest joys in life is watching films that that once I sort of realized that it would be a fun and hopefully a charming rhetorical device for a reader to have a narrator say, time and time again in the book. I saw a movie once where and sort of refract experience into memory of film. Once I was like, oh, I should keep doing this a lot in the book because this is both fun for me and I think it's like a nice rhetorical, it defines the narrator in his voice in a way. But I've just seen so many movies that I could sort of like whatever I needed, I could draw from memory. And then I didn't want to go back and try and make my like the Graham sort of descriptions of the film line up too closely to what is true to the film itself. Mostly because in a couple cases I totally invented films that they just don't exist, but I had him.
Are they in the glossary?
They're not, no. I think I told the Tin House people like this is totally invented, so I can't cite anything. And they're like, okay. But yeah, and I also wanted his sort of like brief dips into describing the films for a reader to be a little bit more impressionistic than literal.
But this gets back a little bit to Holden Caulfield, because Holden Caulfield appears at first glance to be this, he is young, but to be this kind of fumbling narrator. And as he fumbles his way into scenes and into ideas and to memories, you realize that there's a profundity to who he is. And that seems to be a little bit what you're talking about here. Instead of getting it right, you're getting it right as you remember it.
Yeah. And I think one thing that that I actually think I learned from this movie Wonder Boys. Do you guys know Wonder Boys, which is also based
Michael
on
Chabon novel with
it's like I've probably watched that movie more times in my life than any other film. I just encountered it as like a 13-year-old and like was obsessed with it and remained very charmed by it. But there's a scene in that movie where Tobey Maguire's character is like standing out in a yard and Michael Douglas's character comes out to be like, is everything okay? And Tobey Maguire's character says, I was just looking at the greenhouse and then he says, it looks like heaven. And Michael Douglas's character is like, it looks like heaven. And then Tobey Maguire's character says, I saw a movie once where, and so I think I stole that rhetorical device a little bit from that, but what I think is so cool about what it allows for is that it allows for the narrator to have like deeper thoughts than a reader might believe he would be able to express, because like some dramatic situation has happened and the reader will say, I saw a movie once where Katharine Hepburn is waving at people in a departing boat. When she turns away, you can see that she's weeping. It was one of the saddest things I've ever seen. And then he likens that to event that he's just witnessed. So he doesn't have to have the big heavy thought. He gets to refract it through a movie. And I'm not articulating this well, but there's something about refracting, taking the immediate experience and being unable to talk about it directly, but allowing a movie to say something like big about it that felt important and helpful to me.
Did you have a little, I don't know if you've got this marked or not, but, and this is gonna be punishment for all of you who didn't finish reading the book. But there's a movie passage that you quote that's sort of a forlorn passage at the end. Do you have it there? Can you read it?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
So this is really the very end of the book, and the narrator, who's now in his mid-30s, he's just run into Jana, his buddy's girlfriend from their high school years, and they have a conversation, and then they say goodbye to one another. After Jana left, I stood on the street corner for a little while. Traffic passed back and forth. Music played from the open windows of passing cars. It was July. In the park across the street, children ran across the paths, calling out to one another through the dusk. I saw down the street the lights of a movie theater's glowing marquee and went in to see a film whose ending continues to haunt me. It follows the protagonist from his boyhood in Florida to his adulthood in Georgia. Like me, he was meek. Like me, he did not act on life, but let life act on him. Like a boulder on the face of a high mountain, its shape warped by continuous wind. By the film's end, the boy has grown into a man, but the last shot is of his face as the unformed boy he's always been, standing on a bare beach in the evening on the shore, looking out into the dark.
All right, so this is, we're going to wrap it up and then we're going to take a break. I've got one more thing. My favorite passage in the novel, or at least the one I keep coming back to, it reads, "Sometimes I think about what would that cost? Speaking openly, expressing what we feel. Hardly anything, it seems. We spend almost every single second of our lives letting the seconds pass us by, not saying the things we think, not asking the questions in our mind, not admitting to the desires we might have. Why?" So I'm going to leave this. This will be the last one, and then we'll take the break. But going back to the metaphysical, metafictional construction of the novel, Graham Katz, Grady Chambers. Graham Katz has a lot of generosity, not without criticism, but a lot of generosity toward the characters, but much less so toward himself. What you've done in writing this book, is it partly in trying to find that generosity for Graham Katz, or to find a way for him to be comfortable with himself?
I think ultimately, yes. I didn't necessarily have that intention in mind, but sort of wonderfully, in talking with people who've read the book since it came out, a number of people have made the curious remark that they've sort of said, I think by the end of the book, like Graham ends up in a good place, that he's in a better place than where he was at other points. So I think that is an element, that something coming through is Graham extending that kind of generosity to himself. But just in terms of like the nuts and bolts of writing the book, it was a conscious choice. The reason that I had Graham be so self-critical at points, and I think that readers have experienced him as more self-critical than I had realized him to be or had necessarily intended. But because there are points in the book where he casts real judgments towards other people in his life, friends and whatnot. And there's a couple points where he says some things to people that he regrets. I wanted to make sure that readers did not feel like this dude is just a dick. Like, I just don't like this person. So my way, and maybe I overcompensated to try and prevent that, was to have him be as hard and apparently harder on himself than he is on other people. But it's a beautiful thing to me that you find the narrator to be generous and big-hearted towards others. That's great.
Yeah, and I did lock all the windows before we got here, so, just in case. So Barbara, we're gonna take a break now, so you guys. Okay, thanks everybody for being here tonight. And I know, as I said, I think most of you have read the novel or tried to finish it and getting close. So this is all for you. I'm gonna try to repeat questions if I need to, so that we can get that on the video here, but it's not critical, so. Anybody have a question, comment? Sharon first.
I started talking about this Grady before, but for me, and I'm seeing this through the lens of someone with a 15, almost 16-year-old son, and thinking about his friends in a different era. But for me, alcohol seemed like a main character in the story in a way that I just couldn't wrap my mind around. And partly because it was teenagers drinking this much alcohol. Where are the adults? How come no one knows?
What do you think, Jen?
So for the camera, Sharon Woodhouse has commented about the prevalence of alcohol in the lives of these characters. We didn't touch upon that when we were talking, but as a parent, Sharon was a little bit curious or shocked about that.
Especially with kids these days do not drink as much supposedly.
Right.
And was that I know, and it's more prevalent in private schools too, from what I hear. These types of parties, parents not home, accessible bars, well-stocked bars. And it was just, I thought it was interesting. I thought that it was a deliberate choice because it went all the way through. It wasn't just a scattered 9/11 reference of the war.
No, it's this is drinking is a big part of this, right? I mean, when Graham reflects some of these moments of insensitivity, some of these regrets, they're fueled by alcohol. And it's only much later that he comes to realize that alcohol has been a big part of their lives. And of course, we have the high school, circle of friends in high school, and then we have them 20-something years later. And some of them have come to have good relationships with alcohol or different, and some of them have their lives have been dramatically impacted by it, right?
Yeah, and in some ways, the way there's a kind of mirror between the observation that Graham makes in the novel, that he's, he says at one point, like, I didn't expect to be spending this much time talking about drinking or thinking about alcohol. It's just that when I look back, I'm startled to find that I see that it was always there. There's a kind of mirror between that and how alcohol came to figure as prominently in the book that it does, in that I think as I was working on the first section of the book, and thinking about my own high school experience and creating this scenario that the characters find themselves in by the end of the first section, I found that I was writing a lot about these characters drinking. And so once I saw how much that came into the first section of the book, it almost sort of necessitated it becoming a theme throughout the rest of the book. And I saw I saw it as something that could be useful in terms of something that the book thinks about. And yeah, I mean, like my friends and I started drinking at a kind of startlingly early age. And so that was very much a part of our high school experience. And as I've gotten older, I've seen people in my life who started out with the same relationship to alcohol come to have extraordinarily different relationships to alcohol, and that became something that I was interested in exploring, and also just that line. I think there's a real line between drinking in a way that that connects you with others and connects you to the world. And on the other side of that line, I think there's a point when it takes you away from the world. And so I think that's something that the book sort of shows both sides of at different points.
Yeah, and there's some beautiful passages in which Graham describes Chicago in particular, but also other spots too. But when he's drunk, and it's almost like this Technicolor world, and that's sort of the idealized, version of drinking and having everything be so accentuated. But then it, obviously, becomes abuse for a lot of the characters in this novel. So Rita, you were.
Well, there were actually, I have two questions. I feel like I'm at a Trump press conference. So they're both really important, but we have to remember there's a second. And one has to do with structure and the other has to do with the arc of guilt. The guilt that your character has. But the thing about structure is I was intrigued. It's hard when you're a writer and you're reading somebody else's stuff and you're trying to figure out why are they doing this and how are they doing this. But I kind of came to the conclusion towards the end that this is really a fictional memoir by Graham. Because there's a lot of musing, as opposed to scene dialogue, but there's a lot of, here's what I felt about this. This is
and you think that's much more a hallmark of memoir as a genre than
it's memoir. And then I think there are two places or three, and I could have missed something, but they're towards the end where you do break it and you say is it Jana? At the end you say, yes, and I'm telling her about this book I'm writing now.
Right.
And you did it, I think 2 or 3 times. And I thought, oh, this is a fictionalized memoir. And that's how, I just wondered how you were thinking of it. And if that evolved, it seemed like it evolved as you were writing it.
Yeah. I think of it as just flat out a work of fiction. A fictionalized memoir is, there's definitely some truth to that. The thing is like it draws from life for sure. And there are a couple things that are like straight up like this happened. But there's so much that didn't, that it can't be memoir. And I think about, I mean, I think
Memoir
about
of your fictional character and his fictional life, telling
sure.
us about that story.
That feels, yeah,
That's
that
what
feels,
I'm thinking.
yeah, I love that.
Well,
That's what it felt like to me. Yeah.
Stephen Dobbins was one of my teachers at Syracuse, and brilliant man. And he said, what matters is not what gives rise to the metaphor, but the metaphor itself. And so that's, I think, what you were saying to Rita, even though you're using your biography, you're also the story, the fictionalized version, you're trying to get at a truth by taking liberties with it, right?
Which makes it a
Absolutely.
really fascinating genre.
Yeah,
So
Yeah.
it's the fictionalized memoir of Graham, who is the author, who whatever. But,
Yeah.
but I thought there was a definite, I thought you were telling this at the end when you broke in a couple times and said, this is the book I'm writing now, Janet.
totally.
Yeah.
You know,
This is your Lolita, right?
I've never finished Lolita, so I don't know well enough to know if I should do that.
wow.
Oh, he's dead.
But no, I think, yeah, I think it's a complicated question about, you know, of what do you call something that definitely draws from life, and that is in my mind equally or more invention. But you know, that moment that you reference at the end of the book, for those who haven't gotten there yet, the narrator is having coffee with Jana, who was his friend, you know, Ryan's girlfriend in high school, and Jan is asking him about his life, and he says, you know, I've been writing stories, and she's like, what are you writing about? And he says, well, I'm writing about you and Ryan and the dissolution of your relationship. And she says, why would you tell that story? Like, I don't, it's just something that happened when I was young. I don't think about it. And the reason that I wanted that to be in the book, and having the narrator be a writer, sort of made that interaction between the two of them possible, because it allowed him to say, I'm writing a story that is about you and your ex-boyfriend. For Jana to say to him, like, that the events you're talking about, that I haven't thought about that in years, that's just something that happened. Meanwhile, the reader is reading a book where the narrator is just obsessed over this relationship for 200 pages. I think it's up to the reader whether or not you believe Jana that she hasn't thought about this. But it was important to me that she at least say that to him, because I think that it gets at something about the subjectivity of all storytelling, and that we invent, when we make sense of another person's life, so much of that is our projection and our speculation. And there is the possibility in this book that this great disaster of a relationship that the narrator has just spent 200 pages, you know, musing about, that to the people involved, that at least to one of the people involved, didn't mean all that much. It was just a high school relationship that didn't work out.
Well, that was that guilt arc I was thinking about. It's like, that's definitely but it's like, to me, that was the way that he was making sense of some of these things that had happened. And then at the end, she's just like, that's just life.
Totally.
And it was wonderful. You know, it was wonderful, but it was like, and here's like, you know, yeah.
Betty,
Who in this room believed her?
who in this room believed Jana?
I did.
Oh, Sharon and Margaret both believe Jana.
You did not?
Janet was lying.
You think so?
I mean,
What do you think? Are you gonna tell us?
It's
I bought it.
I have to say something.
Let Margaret come in here. Margaret, you got in a big fight and I had to eat it.
Well.
Margaret and I grew up with different definitions of the word sensitivity.
Well, no, I was just, like earlier on, I was just like, he keeps talking about this relationship and the importance of it, but I'm not seeing any evidence, like a lot of evidence. I mean, it doesn't feel like a lot. So when that happened at the end, I was like, yeah, I mean, there was no artifacts of this compelling, like, relationship. It just felt like he was maybe rejecting, honestly. But that was just, you know, that was my my view on it. So when it happened at the end, it's just, you know, we're saying, I didn't think she was lying at all. I was like, oh, yeah, I mean, he was like, putting a lot on that.
And I'm not gonna comment because I gotta ride home with Margaret and spend the rest of my life with her. So I'll let you take that.
Well, I have the opinion that she had moved on in life. She had created another life for herself where he had not. I mean, in a lot of ways, he was still stuck in the adolescent, you know, the relationships and all of that. So I believed her.
But let them write this final true. Anyway, I just wanted to say, I mean.
Was that even supposed to be a question that you're leaving us with?
That is definitely supposed to be a question. Yeah, I mean, her saying at some point, it's just something that happened, felt very important to me. And that's kind of why I had the narrator be a writer, so that she could ask him, what are you up to? He says, I'm telling a story. And she says, what story? It's your story. And so.
And is your intention that it's unresolved?
Yes, to have people read it different ways. One thing I will say, which maybe to put people at ease, if you're like, but in real life, what happened between these two characters? Jana is a total invention. There's no corresponding real life Jana. There, you know, there is a real life person who's the basis of Ryan's character, but he never had a great high school love. So, yeah. Yeah,
Sally?
too bad for him.
But was Graham projecting on in this couple just as he was with the movies? He was at one point, you write about, you know, Graham thought love was like in the movies. He had kind of learned kind of what the template for a romantic relationship with, and it seems like his observations of Ryan and Jana were just another aspect of that, or alive right in front of him, but sort of like a movie that he was watching but didn't really know.
Yeah,
what was going
that feels true to me. I think he definitely idealizes that relationship.
And didn't you also want to be Ryan? I mean, there was times when I thought, okay, he's really in love with Ryan.
Many people have been like,
And it was
this
like
person's
that,
totally in love with
but
him.
I was really sure we were going in that direction.
Right.
And then it was like, but I wish I was Ryan. You know?
Right. I think it is my responsibility to put all those things into the field, and none of my responsibility to resolve them.
But aren't you really good at picking up all the streets?
It makes me so happy. It's so gratifying.
But he wasn't the only one who felt that way. Sam felt that way too.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh.
It enlightened their relationship a lot because this model of what real love looked like.
Sure.
Truly.
Again, I can't comment.
Have another glass of wine.
So what are you working on now?
Mostly poems recently. Yeah, I mean, I'm always, that's sort of like the foundational part of my writing routine is I'm always sort of collecting notes, you know, for whatever they want to be a part of, but they're often when I revisit them sort of in the poetry vein. So yeah, I'm working on another poetry manuscript, and yeah, for the last couple of years have been compiling notes to something that I hope will become a second novel if I can write it. And yeah, and I felt recently like I am starting to see a potential like shape and arc. So hopefully we'll start more committedly spending time actually trying to write that soon.
Do you have time? What do you do? Are you a teacher?
I do. I have loads of time, which is such a blessing, and it's partly because I don't teach anymore.
I shouldn't say that. It's like, oh, I'm currently unemployed.
Well, no,
Rita.
fortunately, no, fortunately, I am employed. I work for, I do grant writing and communications for a disabilities services organization in Philadelphia. So we help people with disabilities find jobs, and then, yeah, and then most of the bulk of our employees are sort of like direct support workers who will be on site with a person depending on their needs to help them become independent. And yeah, so I write grants and tell nice stories about the work that we do, which is
That's
great.
great.
Yeah.
Um, if I could ask another question about.
This is Ray Zemer.
About craft. Obviously, the timeline of this jumps around quite a bit, and you made the decision to present it in a non-linear fashion, right? The chronology is all over. I'm curious as to whether you wrote it in chronological order, or if you conceived of it as this sort of chronology, mixed up chronology.
I didn't write it. I guess I conceived of it as a mixed up chronology. You know, the first finished version of the book was 100 pages long. It was about half the length that the published version of it is. And an editor at Tin House read that first version and basically said, you know, for various reasons, I think the most effective version of the story would be about twice the length. And that first version of the book, it basically stopped with Ryan enlisting. I mean, there's a few things that happened after that, but the editor, I mean, it was just the best advice that I've ever been given, or this book would not exist without her advice in this regard. But she was like, I think it will be a much more effective story if we see the characters into their late 20s and 30s and see how some of the events that you write about in their high school years like come to play out in when they're adults. So but for whatever reason, I didn't outline anything. I didn't like plan things out. I think I had some sense of where I wanted the book to end up. If for various in a different way, like the end of the published version is the same end as that of the version that was half the length. And but I just had to reconfigure things to make it make sense as the end of the longer version. But I felt strongly that that's where the book needed to end. So I at least had a destination in mind. But yeah, my instinct was just to like in moving the book forward to write into a scene, to have there be like a present of the action, like all of them, you know, having dinner at a house on Long Island, or the narrator going to Brooklyn for a weekend. And I knew that those events would be sort of very disparate in time, but I think just the way that I write is to have a present action and then to talk about things from the past that are underneath the surface that are informing that present. And it's just, I don't know why I do that, but that's what happens.
You know, I think Barbara's ending the Zoom here soon, which doesn't mean we have to stop talking, but Barbara, do you
I'm
have a
here.
question? Do you want to make a question or comment before the Zoom kind of fades out? You
I
don't have to, I'm just offering you the
No
chance.
pressure, no pressure. No, I've really enjoyed this and hearing about your writing. I wish I could be there. Rita can probably tell you that there are a lot of similarities in the way apparently we conceive of our writing and started out as poets, although I'm the first to admit I was truly and utterly, no false modesty, terrible. But it did give me a certain kind of sensibility and a certain way I think about time and memory and not telling stories in a completely chronological fashion. And I've really enjoyed listening to you.
Thank you. Thanks
Thanks,
so much
Barbara.
for joining us from afar.
And so, ironically, the advice that stuck with me for a long time was the opposite of what you got from Tin House, which said, you know, double the length.
Yeah.
Tobias Wolff was my teacher at Syracuse, and he had written a novella which is brilliant called The Barrett's Thief, and it's about a 90-page story.
Yeah.
And we were talking about it one day, and you know, I asked him about, you know, the process, and he said that the first draft of that was a 400-page novel.
Wow.
And he said, and he kept whittling away and whittling away. He said he challenged himself to see, and this is what has stuck with me all these years, how much weight every sentence could bear. Which is just
It's a
the
beautiful
opposite.
thought.
Yeah,
Yeah. I love
but of
that.
course, Toby's well, first of all, he's, you know, one of the great
Master
American
craftsman.
writers, but
Right.
also like he's a minimalist, and you know, he's a different style than that. But I do think about that a lot. Like, do we need this? You know, like, is this adding anything? Is this important?
Totally.
Yeah.
Just acknowledging what you said.
This was a great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you
very
so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
Right.
Delighted to, you were coming in and that Jen gets to the office, so thank you, I mean, got you through across the country, so.
It is such a pleasure, and that, you know, this organization, that your celebration and sort of lifting up the work of Chicago Connected Authors, present and past, is the coolest thing, and I'm very honored to have received the invitation. So
All
this
right,
is
let's
very
give
fun.
Grady a